Thank you, Regan. Great. Thanks everyone for being here. My name is Melanie Buttle and I am the principal of Peter Zosky College here at Trent University. Really happy to have Hamza Khan with us here today, and I'm going to introduce him in a second. But first, I want to do a land acknowledgement and then talk a little bit about what Enwayaang is about. We respectfully acknowledge that we are on the treaty and traditional territory of the Mississauga Anishinaabe. We offer our gratitude to the First Nations for their care for and teachings about our earth and our relations, and may we honor those teachings. And I just want to go one step further because I heard a really interesting CBC radio broadcast this morning about land acknowledgements and their value, and the point that was made by the Indigenous leaders on that call were that it's one thing to do the land acknowledgement, and then this next step is what can you do in your own life. So I would say that we all have a responsibility to think about what reconciliation means, to learn a little bit more about the land we're on, but also to decide what that means in terms of active steps. And in Zosky College, we try really hard to partner well and work as allies of the First Peoples House of Learning and with Indigenous students and programming on campus. So we take that quite seriously, but there's always more to be done. So I just wanted to make that point first. So the Enwayaang series, this is our second year of doing semi-regular engaging Zoom conversations. Enwayaang is the name of the building that Zosky College is found in, and the word is an Anishinaabe word that means the way we speak together. And we take that quite seriously and see these talks as an opportunity to speak together with our guests and leaders in our community and beyond. And so that's kind of what frames our discussion. Hamza Khan is with us tonight. Hamza is an award-winning marketer and best-selling author of 2 books, The Burnout Gamble and Leadership Reinvented. He is a global keynote speaker whose TEDx talk, Stop Managing, Start Leading, has been viewed more than 1 million times. As an educator, he is currently a top-ranked instructor at Ryerson University, teaching courses on marketing and communication. As co-founder of Skills Camp, a leading soft skills training company, Hamza is on a mission to empower organizations to thrive in the future of work. He regularly shares his insights on the topics of leadership, resilience, and productivity. And his insights have been featured by notable media outlets such as Vice, Business Insider, and the Globe and Mail. I'm excited to announce that Hamza will also be visiting Trent University in person in winter 2022 at the end of January as the Ashley Fellow. And that's a distinguished visiting fellowship offered through the Trent University colleges that the fellowship is a great opportunity for Hamza to be here and engage with students, faculty, staff around his insights. And so a learning and growing community experience for all of us that we are really excited about. So thank you, Hamza, for agreeing to be the Ashley Fellow. And we're looking forward to having you here in January. Tonight, we're really excited to welcome him here on the topic Beyond Burnout, which is kind of appropriate as students are heading into reading week, which is hopefully a chance to recharge and refresh and not be burned out is the goal. So I think our timing is really great here. We are really lucky to have a sneak preview of some of the work and ideas that Hamza will also be bringing to us as the Ashley Fellow. Thank you so much for joining us, Hamza, and I turn the floor over to you.
Dr. Buttle, thank you so much for that very generous introduction, and to Trent University, everybody watching today, hello and welcome. This is Beyond Burnout, reconceptualizing the health epidemic of the 21st century. Once again, my name is Hamza Khan. I'm a speaker, author, and educator, as you just heard, and it's my absolute pleasure to take you on this fantastic journey through burnout all the way to its source, its origins. Now, from the Canadian Armed Forces, the Canadian Food Inspections Agency, all the way to Johnson & Johnson and AstraZeneca, from PepsiCo to P&G, I'm trusted by, usually these forward-thinking, larger organizations of all shapes and sizes to help their people thrive, and not just survive, but thrive in the future of work. But I think it's very special that I'm here today with another leading forward-thinking organization in the form of Trent University, an academic community that I'm so excited to be joining very shortly. And I want to empower you, its vibrant community, more than I've wanted to empower any other community that I've spoken to, not just during the pandemic, but certainly before that as well. But before we really get going, I did want to give you a quick heads up that this talk could touch on some sensitive topics. So when we're discussing burnout, naturally mention is going to be made of such things as death or dying, self-injurious behavior, mental illness, and perhaps even suicide. So if anything we talk about today causes you to revisit trauma, please do not hesitate to tune out and rejoin if and when you are ready. So in the spirit of Enwayaang, in the spirit of speaking together, I thought I'd do something very unusual with this opportunity. And I want to ask you in advance for your patience and understanding during this process. So typically, I deliver very polished talks for businesses, mostly businesses, governments. They're properly structured, they're well designed, they're practiced, tested, rehearsed. That's not happening today. Today, I thought I would bring you something raw, unfinished, and very much a work in progress, but from my heart. This is the topic that I get fired up about, no pun intended. It's a collection of insights and research that I've been collecting over the past at least 5 years. And it's not only the current focus of my graduate research, it's actually the subject that I feel the most drawn to as a researcher, as a speaker, and not just as an academic, but as a human being. What I have for you today isn't a solution to a problem. Rather, it's a re-articulation of the problem or problems with the goal of better inspiring a solution or inspiring a better solution. And again, I can't think of a better audience with whom to engage with these really difficult ideas. So why am I taking this approach? For the past 7 years, at least, I've been writing about, speaking about, and thinking about occupational burnout. And during this time, it's been great to see the term reach the mainstream. I know what burnout is, you know what burnout is. And it's also been awesome to see a whole spectrum of solutions appear in the market aimed at helping us beat burnout and mitigate our stress. Self-care as a term has entered the lexicon, and it feels like today there's no shortage of resources which aim to help people reduce stress and beat burnout. We're all familiar with the solutions. We know how to reduce stress. It's eat healthy, sleep approximately 8 hours a night, seek therapy, etc. We know how to practice self-care, do yoga, journal, gratitude, meditate. We know how to optimize productivity, declutter, set goals, minimize distractions. We're told that it's our responsibility to manage our health and wellness. And while this has been going on, concurrently for all of the organizations that I've alluded to earlier, I've been advocating another idea for leaders, for teams. I've been telling them to define what the word enough means. But as I'm coming to accept, enough isn't enough, especially when we're dealing with forces far outside of any one person's control. Burnout, as you'll come to learn in this talk, is a psychosocial phenomenon. And so just as Trent has invited me to contribute to the ongoing process of improving the academic community, I would like to also extend an invitation to every single person on this call and every single person that I'm going to meet during my fellowship. I want to invite you into my brain, into the edges of my thoughts to help us envision a better future, because boy, oh boy, do we need one. Okay, let me quickly get you caught up with the end of the talks that I do for other people. I'm going to start with the end and take you into uncharted territory. I want to get you caught up on my research and then unravel 6 layers of burnout and end with a question that will open up a larger discussion. So over the next 25 minutes, hang tight. It's about to get wild. So to start, I have been tracking through my research the growth of several key performance indicators that span the year 2010 all the way to 2020. I've been looking at the tremendous growth that has been taking place across several markets: the self-care market, the wellness market, self-improvement market, pharmaceutical market, fitness market, and the self-help resource market, as well as the wellness app market. And there's every indication with the growth in those markets, as well as Google search trends that span the last 10 years, there's every indication that people are curious about stress, they're curious about burnout, and they're curious about self-care. And the market, I believe, has responded to this demand in some substantial ways. And that begs the question then. So over the past decade, if we're looking just at the self-care market alone, a 4,400% increase in the size of that market, that begs the question, over the past decade, has this awareness and has the response by the market produced the intended results? Are global levels of burnout on the decline? What do you think? Has the increased interest in and solutions for beating burnout produced the intended result? Are global levels of burnout declining? The answer is a resounding no. Oh my goodness. Not only are levels of stress and burnout increasing, in most cases, they're exponentially increasing. Thus, we're wrestling with a burnout paradox. If we're in a supposed golden age of interest and solutions for beating burnout, why is burnout still this widespread and growing? So this took me all the way back to the origins of the term, which was coined in the 70s by one Dr. Herbert Freudenberger. And the term burnout was introduced as a metaphor, and it was a powerful metaphor because it expressed suffering that demanded a name, that demanded recognition and treatment. And it did so in a language that is both easily understandable and open. And it has two components: burnout as a syndrome, so a collection of symptoms, and humans, visualizing humans as energy systems that either gain energy or lose energy. But the problem with this metaphor, as powerful as it was, as effective as it was, and keep in mind that burnout is a concept in motion, the problem with the metaphor is that it induces individual treatment to a psychosocial phenomenon, as you're going to come to learn. So what I'm going to do with you in our session today is take you on a journey through 6 steps, through 6 stops. And I want to start in reverse order all the way downstream, where we think the solutions to beating burnout exist, or at least where we've been told they exist. I want to go beyond burnout, working backwards all the way to the furthest upstream factor that I've been able to identify through my research. And once again, I'm taking you right to the very edges of my thoughts about this subject. Everything I'm going to share with you today has yet to crystallize. Like I said, burnout is a concept in motion, and I'm exploring these ideas actively, hence why my presentation is visually and structurally very raw. I'm exploring these ideas in real time with you, and I can't think of a better group of people to do this with. Now, my hypothesis, to be clear, isn't about trying to find the architects of burnout. I'm not looking for a boogeyman per se. I'm looking for a lasting solution to the epidemic of occupational burnout. And there just happens to be some pretty compelling evidence that leadership structures rather, are more responsible for inducing burnout than we've been led to believe. And that's a thread worth pulling, if you ask me. So we'll start our journey at stop 1 of 6. All aboard. Our first stop is the Pepsi myths. What are the Pepsi myths? The experience of modern life is one which produces profound feelings of lack. And I say this with the utmost confidence as a former marketing and communications professional whose work involved contributing to these feelings. Everything that I did as a marketing professional was about making you feel like you're not enough. Any day, any given day, none of us on this call feel like we're perfect enough, we're efficient enough, progressive enough, satisfied enough, or innovative enough. Think about the last 18 months. Those of us who are fatigued, we feel guilty that we're not doing enough during the pandemic. And those of us who've managed to find our flow and who feel productive also feel guilty because we suddenly have all this free time on our hands. So we're living in a pressure cooker in a sense that always lets us, that I would say rather never lets us quite feel like we are the most actualized versions of ourselves. We think that becoming intense and highly engaged in this environment is the solution to our anxiety about modern life, but it's not. Yale University found a direct link between an employee or a student's level of engagement and their probability of burning out. It's a sinister trick. The more engaged we become with our work, with our studies, the more likely we are to burn out. It's a trick that warps the paradigm of work to live into live to work, even though there's very clear evidence that work-life imbalance produces diminishing returns. And it's this performance pressure that serves as the fire starter, in a sense, for burnout. So allow me to share with you the story that set me down the path to burning out back in 2014. 2014 was a turning point in my life. It's a year in which I practiced what's known as the 9-9-7 work week. That's working 9 a.m. to 9 p.m. 7 days a week. And it's a type of working style that's popularized in some parts of Southeast Asia. Now, to be fair, I did have a lot going on. I was building 2 businesses, I was running teams, writing for multiple publications, staying on top of industry trends, teaching courses, doing interviews, attending conferences, traveling, speaking, and then some. A lot was going on. I had overburdened myself. And at the start of the year, my intensity was actually working in my favor. I thought I unlocked a new gear of productivity. I was outperforming my peers. I was getting promoted. I was boasting and bragging about my multitasking skills using that hashtag we all hate, hashtag hustle. I was being touted as an example for taking on new projects. I gave into a sort of workplace hero complex, if you will. I would answer emails late into the night. I would work through evenings and weekends. I didn't take a single vacation. I transformed during that year from a human being into a human doing, but little did I know what was in store for me. I gradually became a risk, not just to myself, but to the entire organization. My so-called productivity became toxic. Now, at the top of 2014, I promised myself this celebratory trip around the world. And I actually went ahead and booked it with the ridiculous itinerary that you can see on your screen. And this was going to be my reward for a year of overwork. I was going to put the pedal to the metal. I was going to burn the candle on both ends. I was going to fire on all cylinders. And it was time to show up. And I worked and I worked and I worked and I worked some more. I fell in love with capitalism, but it turned out capitalism didn't love me back. Somewhere along that journey, I began to teeter on the brink of burnout. I continued to grind myself down. And in the end, not only was I non-productive, I was anti-productive. I was making mistakes the rest of my team had to fix. I look back at that time and I remember feeling tired. I felt exhausted. but I'd become oblivious to the damage that I was causing around me. I thought that, the splash damage was localized to my portfolio. But as is typically the case with burnout, by the time I realized that I was burning out, it was far too late. Nevertheless, I thought that I could flame out like a phoenix, take this grand trip around the world, return from the ashes, reborn, ready to hustle again. Did that happen? Let's find out. All right, friends, the day I was supposed to leave on that adventure around the world, would you believe it? I got what I initially thought was cold feet, and it happened right as I was about to call an Uber to go to the airport. At first, my chest clamped, then my breathing became shorter, my knees buckled, my temperature skyrocketed, I started to panic, and then all of a sudden I passed out. And I woke up with barely minutes left until my flight was supposed to depart. And in my delirium, I thought that I could still book it to the airport, rush the tarmac, and get on that flight. But my body had other plans. It said, hold on, Hamza, not this time. See, if you don't pick the time to relax, your body will pick it for you. And trust me, it will usually pick the most inconvenient time. And I remained seated in an unfamiliar panic, and I stared as the clock counted down 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. And just like that, the flight left without me. I felt nauseous, I threw up, and I instantly became sicker than I had ever been before. And for the next 30 days, I was alone at home, bedridden and bewildered. And when I spoke to doctors about what had happened, they all said that I exhibited the symptoms of a panic attack, a complete system failure, which led me to fall as deathly ill as I did. My adrenal glands were depleted. My mental health was wrecked. I could barely get up out of bed in the morning for those 30 days. In fact, 2 of the doctors who I spoke to said that based on the symptoms, I might have even suffered a silent heart attack, which flabbergasted me to no end because I thought up until that point, I was physically healthy, but that couldn't be further from the truth. Despite the disarray, one thing was for certain. For all of my boasting and bragging and use of hashtag hustle on social media, for how much I said work was chaotic, no matter how productive I felt, I have remarkably very little to show for my output during the year 2014. There's nothing that I can point to and say, I got that done. There was a lot of busy work, a lot of things being checked off, a lot of meetings being had, a lot of emails being sent. But in terms of moving the needle on projects, nothing really got done. I let my team down, I let the organization down, and I let myself down. I had gotten so caught up in the little things that I stopped leading and influencing the big things. And I couldn't believe it. I mean, how did this happen? So much of my identity, like I imagine yours, is tied up in being productive. And here I was listening to doctors tell me that I could no longer work at the levels that I did, or else next time it could be fatal. So in the dead of the winter of 2014, I had some tough questions to ask. What exactly happened? Is something wrong with me? How could I have prevented this? How didn't I see this coming? Was this inevitable? And am I alone? And the biggest question of all for me was why? Why did this happen to me? And one of the first stories that I discovered was that of a young man named Moritz Erhardt, who was in the UK, about the same age that I was, who went through a similar sequence of events that I did as well in terms of burning out, especially when you consider his first internship. And it's a really harrowing story, and I'll get right to the end of the story, but I would encourage you to look it up in your own time. I was very lucky. I was very lucky that I was able to beat burnout, recover from it with my health and wellness intact. That's not the case for Moritz Erhardt. He went through the same sequence of events and ended up having a seizure, which then led to his untimely death. And then later I would discover about Avicii, a very famous DJ who passed away in 2018 because of burnout. Right? So this is not just happening with people at quote unquote our level, youth, early talent. It's not just happening with professionals further along in their career. This is happening even in the realm of celebrity with Avicii. It's even happening to some people that are household names. Adele, Beyonce, Meghan Markle, and Robert Whittaker, famous UFC fighter, have all been very public in their battles with burnout. They have taken hiatuses. Robert Whittaker most recently took 2 years away in the middle of his UFC prime because he was burning out. So this is not just localized to some type of people. It's not just localized to demographics that are specific to a region in the world or a type of work. This is happening seemingly universally. And we're seeing manifestations of burnout's underlying problem everywhere, most recently with a term that has become commonplace, at least for knowledge workers, which is the Great Resignation. And so the Great Resignation describes this trend of how 50 million people currently around the world, I believe, are, I think, if I remember the stat correctly, they're about 3 months away from leaving their job. And we've never seen anything like this. Here in North America, 14 million people compared to 3 million in 2019 have exited the labor market and are classified as not working and not looking for work. And even with the subsidies expiring, like CRB and whatnot, the numbers aren't really changing. And then I'm fascinated by this movement that's taking place in China. And I think we're going to start to see manifestations of it happen all over the world, known as involution. It's a really powerful signal of what's to come. And Jing Bao, who's an anthropologist, described it as the experience of being locked in competition that one ultimately knows is meaningless. And if you see symptoms of involution, or if you see signs of it rather, take place in China, it looks like students taking selfies, taking photos of themselves, young people taking photos of themselves, not doing anything. They're not in class, they're not attending work, they've just given up on society itself. They're like, wow, I don't want to participate in this quote unquote rat race anymore. An entire generation has decided enough's enough. We're not going to die for a paycheck. So let's do a quick review of the 5 myths of modernity that contribute to performance pressure that makes people feel the compulsion to prove themselves. The feeling of not being progressive enough, the feeling of not being efficient enough, perfect enough, satisfied, or innovative enough, all contribute to this overall lack that we feel profoundly every single day. So this brings us to stop 2 of 6, the slippery slope. In trying to find out answers to why I burned out, I stumbled upon the 12 stages of burnout model. Now, true story, when the 2 doctors who coined the term burnout formulated this model, they were actually laughed at by their colleagues, and their research was even rejected. But here we are now living at a time when the WHO has finally included burnout in its international classification of diseases. So it always starts the same, the compulsion to prove yourself. You take on more work, more projects, more extracurriculars, more courses. Again, this ties back to that performance pressure that we covered at the first stop. Then comes stage 2, which is working harder. You find yourself working nonstop, taking fewer and fewer breaks. From that point onwards, it starts getting slippery. Stage 3 is neglecting your needs. Then stage 4 is displacement of conflicts. You start putting aside difficult situations, that tough conversation you need to have with your team about coming back to the office, or maybe about your partner, about that breakup that needs to happen. Maybe you have it next week, maybe next month, maybe never. Rather than deal with issues, you avoid them altogether. Then comes stage 5, revision of values. Stage 6, denial of emerging problems. Stage 7, withdrawal. Stage 8, odd behavioral changes. Family and friends start to excessively comment on your changing behavior. They seem very concerned about you. It's a topic of conversation every time you meet. Stage 9 is depersonalization. This is when your actions are kind of automated, you have no particular purpose, you're floating through the workday in a bit of a delirious daze, you're staring glass-eyed at the Zoom screen and barely registering what's happening. Stage 10 is inner emptiness. This is you dreading waking up and taking on the day. Stage 11 is depression. Now, if you've been here before, you might recall that anger or apathy became your default response to everything that was going wrong in your life. And finally, stage 12 is full-blown burnout syndrome. And this is total mental and physical collapse. And here's when you absolutely need immediate and full medical attention. And I think the question to ask yourself to gauge if you've been here or not is, did you lose the will to go on? One more time here, the 12 stages of burnout. Also, if you're currently at stage 6 or higher, I urge that immediately after this presentation is done, or probably sooner, that you seek out professional help. And I know that Trent offers fantastic resources for that. Depending on the severity of it, you might even want to consider calling 911, especially if you find yourself in the latter stages of the burnout cycle. Now, I know this has been really heavy so far. And like I said, there's no solution at the end of this. We're just going down the rabbit hole of all the problems. So let me just pause to reassure everybody watching right now that it's okay to not be okay. We're all experiencing higher than usual stress levels. I mean, frankly, I'm amazed that we're productive at all. On top of the now normal stressors of your day-to-day, you've had to contend with a relentless news cycle, economic uncertainty, reintegration anxiety, and on top of all of that, the still on ambient stress of a global pandemic. So before I offer any solutions and steer us in another direction, let me just repeat, it is okay to not be okay. Burnout is happening all around us to a previously unimaginable degree. And I think it's really important that you don't internalize this as individual failure, because that has been the mistake that has brought us to this junction where we have to have a presentation on factors that go beyond burnout. So I learned in the cold winter of 2014 that, like so many of us, I was predisposed to burnout. And if I didn't change my approach, I would burn out again and again and again. But why was I burning out in the first place? What was so different about my situation? Well, it turns out I'm not much different than you or any of your fellow peers, any of the people that you see on your screen here at Trent University and beyond. At some level, we are all struggling with burnout's underlying problem, which is stress, the silent killer. And stress, according to the WHO, is the health epidemic of the 21st century, which brings us halfway through our journey. And I'm going to speed things up because I know that we want to save some time for a nice discussion at the end, and I'm looking forward to that. Stop 3 of 6 are the upstream predictors. So you might have heard this before in your career. If you can't take the heat, get out of the kitchen. A boss might have told you that, literally a family member might have told you that about the kitchen itself in your home, or you might have heard it from a prof, unfortunately. But what if the kitchen is on fire? What if the kitchen itself is on fire? Is this still valid? Dr. Christina Maslach is one of the preeminent burnout researchers, and she has a great quote about workplace culture. She says, workplaces can be very unhealthy environments. If you take a plant and put it in a pot and don't water it and give it lousy soil and not enough sun, I don't care how gorgeous the plant was to begin with, it isn't going to thrive. And so all of the things that we know about self-care and optimizing personal productivity, they all pale in comparison to the stress that is caused by workplaces that are inflexible and downright toxic. And her research involves looking at the upstream predictors that influence burnout. And there's 6 in particular. The first is unsustainable workload. So this is when job demands exceed human limits. You're feeling increased demands at the job. You're experiencing acute fatigue. There's no period of rest and recovery, no balance. Then comes number 2, a lack of control. You have role ambiguity. You're not exactly sure what you're supposed to do. There's little to no participation in organizational decision-making. You are at the receiving end of other people deciding things for you, and you have little to no control over workplace hazards. Then comes number 3, insufficient rewards. This is financial, institutional, or social. Lack of recognition from your boss, your colleagues, managers, external stakeholders. Your work is devalued. At number 4, you have a poor or toxic community. This is when there's a role conflict that inhibits a course of action. This is when there's little to no again, participation in organizational decision-making, similar to the last piece as well. And we have a couple of slides coming up that speak about the specific aspects of what a toxic community looks like. And it usually begins at the top. And then at number 5, you have the lack of fairness, unfair and unequal decision-making at work, incongruence between your inputs and outputs, a lack of reciprocity, imbalanced social exchange processes, and unfair and unsupportive leadership. And finally, last but not least, actually, you have inconsistent or missing values. This is when there's a gap between your individual values and the organization's values, when there's a lack of vision from the leadership, when there's insufficient ideals and motivations, when there's unethical behavior that takes place within the organization. And so if one or more of these 6 things is prevalent in the workplace, your likelihood of burning out increases substantially. So again, unsustainable workload, lack of control, insufficient reward, poor toxic community, lack of fairness, and inconsistent or missing values. But what is it that's encouraging organizations to promote these conditions? Why are our businesses and governments and even nonprofit organizations acting in these ways? What is causing associations, organizations, companies to act in these ways? We're now at stop 4 of 6, the world on fire. If levels of chronic stress continue to go unmanaged, we're going to end up with the nightmare situations like they have out in Southeast Asia. This is the place that has originated the 997 style of work. We can glorified it. Over there, they have region-specific terms to describe the disturbingly normal trend of death by overwork. And I'm not just talking about frontline workers and laborers. This includes knowledge workers and students, much like many in attendance today, dying every single day around the world because of stress. And here is a number that is so big that it takes me, I haven't, as somebody who's considered to be at the forefront of burnout research and speaking and authorship, I haven't been able to wrap my head around this number. The United Nations estimates that every year, 2.8 million people die as a result of workplace stress, excessively long working hours, and workplace-induced disease. And an additional 370 million people get injured or fall ill because of their jobs. I mean, we're literally dying for a paycheck. But why is this happening? And by the way, I should point out, if you were to extrapolate these numbers over the course of 2 years, this would be twice as many deaths that the COVID pandemic has claimed, just to give you a sense of how big of a problem this is. But why is this happening? I mean, why are we acting this way at large? I believe that there are 6 meta factors that preheat the world for burnout, and they form the acronym CASTLE: competition, alienation, society, technology, loneliness, and the economy. And this requires a whole other presentation to adequately explain. We don't have the time today, but let me try to share some glimpses of this meta structure. In terms of competition, consider that the United Nations has predicted that we're on track to see global unemployment rise by 25 million people. And this is also part of that Great Resignation trend that I talked about earlier. Everyone on this call feels grateful to be gainfully employed, to be enrolled at Trent, and perhaps even essential, but at the same time, your overall job insecurity has increased. In terms of alienation, most of us are working and studying from home right now. We're interfacing with more technology and automation than ever before. There was once this sort of magical, serendipitous, kinetic energy about being in a physical place, but all of that is being changed in an instant. I was in a call today where they said that they're probably not going to return to their office ever for this client that I was speaking to. So what is that going to do for those of us who need social interactions, who need to feel the presence of other people and all of the magic that comes from that type of interaction? In terms of society, we're inundated with messages that pressure us into demonstrating our worth, proving that we're essential. And it gets even worse when you log on to social media and you see instances of toxic productivity and toxic positivity that shame us into believing that we're not doing enough. And on top of that, the zeitgeist, the spirit of the age feels heavier than it's ever been before, especially if you're a woman, a person of color, or a member of the LGBTQIA+ community. And rightfully so. This examination of society was long overdue. But with that being said, it's hard to feel rested and hopeful when we're being inundated with a constant barrage of distressing information. And in terms of technology, with traditional work-life barriers disappearing and an always-on work culture, the workday is actually increasing in length. I mean, you would think that technology would lead to greater efficiency, but no. On average, the pandemic workday is 1 to 3 hours longer than its pre-COVID-19 counterpart. And in terms of loneliness, an Ipsos poll found that more than half of North Americans feel lonely during the pandemic, and this can worsen mental health and lead to risky behavior. And on top of everything else, we're forecasted to enter a global recession. Our future has never seemed more volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. Again, these are the 6 castle factors. Okay, we're in the end game now. What is the metastructure which fosters these castle factors? Allow me to provide you with a keyhole through which we can examine it. So I'm currently conducting, as part of my graduate research, a content analysis of the Globe and Mail's international and business coverage to try to understand what socio-political agendas they're trying to advance as a publication. Now, of course, we know it's neoliberalism, but to what extent are they doing this and for whom? Well, it turns out there's negligible coverage of anything related to any of the factors that I've talked about thus far. They talk about burnout. They talk about it at a very surface level. They talk about self-care. They talk about wellness in general, but they never go deep enough. And mind you, this is the same publication that publishes an annual report of the top 100 best places to work. So they have a vested interest with this annual publication of this listing of the best places to work. Plus, when you factor in where they get their advertising dollars from, they have a vested interest in not letting us know about the upstream factors. Now, what's really interesting is I am doing some research also on the side or concurrently to that, which is looking at anonymous reviews of the companies that are listed in the top 100 best places to work. And I also produce a list of the top 100 places that are the bottom 100 places to work. And what I found was fascinating. I was looking for the prevalence through a content analysis of the 6 upstream factors that Dr. Christina Maslach has defined. And what you can see on the left is the prevalence in the top rated companies, and on the right is the prevalence in the bottom rated companies. This is fascinating to me because there is, in most cases, an equal amount, and in some cases, a greater amount of the prevalence of preconditions for burnout in the top 100 companies as they are in the bottom 100 companies. So we're being told by the Globe and Mail, hey, come work at this company. And part of their criteria is around health and wellness and promoting your overall happiness in the organization. But it's clear to see from this content analysis that you are likely to experience the same adverse effects: unsustainable workload, lack of control, insufficient rewards, poor toxic community, lack of fairness, or inconsistent and missing values at these companies. Which leads me to believe that the larger problem here could be, laughably something that many graduate students arrive at naturally, which is late stage capitalism. And this is a popular phrase that targets the inequities of modern day capitalism. And it describes the hypocrisy and the absurdities of capitalism as it digs its own grave in these last stages. And there's 3 hallmarks of this decayed version of the structure that we find ourselves in. So number 1, you have unrealistic perspectives. Late stage capitalism describes the unrealistic perspectives of the wealthiest 1%. And in the same vein, it highlights how the middle class is largely oblivious to the struggle of those who are truly at the opposite end of the spectrum of disenfranchisement. And then at number 2, you have widespread inequality. I mean, this is the gap between the haves and the have-nots. And just look at how the ultra-rich have fared during the pandemic. Look at how vast that chasm between those who have and those who have not has increased. And finally, you have rigged systems. And many feel that capitalism's winners may even favor inequality. And with it, they have fewer competitive threats. They rig the system by creating barriers to entry. They send their children to private schools while cutting funds for public schools, for instance. And these are the three hallmarks of late stage capitalism. One more time: unrealistic perspectives, widespread inequality, and rigged systems. Okay, are you with me so far? This is intense. This is a lot, I know, but hang tight. We're going to get right to a really great discussion, and I can't wait to hear from you. So, the system isn't autonomous. There are people behind it, but who? Let's try to understand first that there seems to be an effort to divert attention away from the structural determinants of burnout. And so if we assume malevolence instead of ignorance, who would have an interest in producing and perpetuating the system? Has the responsibility for beating burnout been unfairly downloaded? Worse, has it been intentionally downloaded to the individual? Why are you and I responsible for mitigating burnout and mitigating stress if we can't even control the factors within our workplaces, for instance? This brings us to our final stop, the edge of my thoughts. This is as far as my research has gone, the darkness below. This is the final boss, if you will. What you have is a very interesting structure that I've seen come up time and again. And especially it happened when I was doing the research for my most recent book, Leadership Reinvented. I was studying three subclinical antisocial qualities that form what's known in the research as the dark triad of destructive leadership. They are narcissism, which is entitlement and perceived superiority, Machiavellianism, which is manipulation and self-interest, and psychopathy, which is impulsiveness and a lack of empathy. And I believe that the old epoch of work, the pre-pandemic epoch of work, actually encouraged this sort of behavior. And that's just one part of it. Now imagine a bigger triangle, and at one vertex, you have the dark triad leaders, right? So this is now the toxic triangle of destructive leadership. It describes how an entire organization might become a manifestation of this deeply antisocial quality that is embedded within all human beings, but not activated by most of them. This is actually quite rare. So you have at the top destructive leaders, and these are, again, subclinical traits, which means that they aren't readily observable. Then at the other vertex, you have susceptible followers. These are conformers and colluders who bend their will to fit those toxic leaders at the top. And this is what happens with these conformers and colluders is you get a culture that, or an environment that permits or rewards toxic behavior. And the third part is a conducive environment. This is, the hallmarks of this conducive environment would be instability, a perceived threat, questionable values and standards, and the absence of governance and ethics. Like I said, this was the dominant structure in our BC before COVID world. Destructive leaders harm employees in countless ways. For instance, they lower morale, they diminish well-being, and they increase work and family conflict. And it goes without saying that they contribute to employee burnout. But here's the kicker. Research has proven that leader behaviors trickle down. They're learned behaviors, which is terrifying to me because of how recently we've been having open and honest conversations about well-being and the social determinants of health. This has all been happening in the last decade. So it begs the question, how long have these antisocial ideologies and behaviors been traveling through time? How large is this substructure? And how much momentum does this movement truly have? What are we going up against? How can we truly solve the problem of burnout if we don't even understand and can't articulate how big of a systemic problem this is? So all things considered, this is one conclusion that I'm almost ready to make. It is not a question of if the people on this call are going to burn out. It is a matter of when. Everyone on this call, if I had to bet, and I'm not a betting person, but you said, Hamza, if you had to bet what percentage of people on this call are going to burn out, I would say 100%. This was the impetus for me to write a book on burnout and to commit my life to researching and speaking about it. And there you have it, Trent. This is as far as I've gotten with the research. I've taken you to the edge of my thinking on the subject. I can't give you a solution because I don't have one yet. But hopefully what you have today is a better synthesis and articulation of the burnout problem than it exists in the mainstream. Then we are led to believe about it. Then we are led to believe, what am I looking for here? The next time you encounter burnout or stress in the wild, the next time you see it in a news publication or a BuzzFeed article, or you see an interesting infographic on Instagram, I want you to think back to this presentation and just ask, at what stage are they asking you to play it? They're probably asking you to play in stage 1 or 2, right? This is your problem. It can be solved with, meditation and mindfulness and gratitude. That's not the case, because now you understand, hopefully, how deep of a problem this is. So like I said, I have no solution yet. Keyword yet. But I hope this early exploration will give us all something to think about. And I think that Trent is uniquely positioned to answer these questions. And I'm really excited to join you as an Ashley Fellow to explore this even further. And I want to ask you, what role are you going to play in shaping a better world? So a quick review. I know I went through this really quickly. I wanted to be mindful of time. And I'm so sorry, Dr. Buttle. I took us 10 minutes over here, but
you're fine. You're good.
Okay, give me like 5 more minutes if that's cool. What happens now? Where do we go from here? I have some starting off points, and I would love to bring this back into a large discussion. Perhaps there's something here in the idea that the pandemic has been something of a short circuit in history. So author Arundhati Roy writes, historically, pandemics have forced humans to break with the past and to imagine their world anew. This one is no different. It is a portal, a gateway between one world and the next. So what is this new world that we're stepping into, and how can we continue to succeed in this world just as we did in the old world? How can we leave behind the practices like antisocial behavior and ideology that has manifested in the dark triad and toxic triangle? What can we do to leave as much of that in our pre-pandemic world as possible? I believe that there is an alternative to the dark triad. I know that there is an alternative to the dark triad, and the research has, but the same researchers, Delroy and Palhus, they've conceptualized the Light Triad, which is pro-human, neutric leadership, if you will, that gives instead of takes. And it has 3 components. It has Kantianism, which is seeing people as ends and not mere means. It's humanism on the other vertex. Every human being is valuable and worthy of dignity. And it has faith in humanity as its 3rd component, to believe that humans are fundamentally good. And I remember reading the research and wondering, why is there not more published about this? Because there was no real appetite for understanding its applicability. I mean, the context just wasn't there yet. In fact, part of the conclusion in the research of the Light Triad said that it is not as advantageous in the modern business environment than the dark triad. It's actually better to be a dark triad leader in the current, or at the time that it was written, the current economy, than it was to be a light triad leader. But we are going through a fundamental rethinking of what is good business, what is business, and what is good. And I believe that change won't come from the outside. It'll have to start from within, with people adopting these beliefs and making these and setting alight these deeply embedded personality traits. And change is coming, and we are starting to see it being signaled, at least in the corporate world. So in 2019, at a business roundtable, Mark Benioff of Salesforce told his contemporaries of Apple, Walmart, et cetera, essentially the captains of industry. He said, the purpose of business now transcends shareholders. We need a reinvented system focused on employees, customers, communities, and the planet. And it's not exactly the answer we're hoping for, but it is a slight orientation in a better direction, reorientation in a better direction. And there's some fascinating glimpses of this world. And I see this all the time. I'm following a couple of things in particular. I'm tracking, these people and these trends. So I'm looking at Dan Price, who's this outspoken CEO of Gravity Payments. You can see his stuff on LinkedIn, very vocal about the old system and advocating a more pro-human way to lead. This is the CEO who made headlines for reducing his salary down to the level of the lowest paid employee in the company. And he made sure that everyone in the company was paid the same amount of money, a living wage. I think it's $70,000 a year. Every employee gets paid at the organization, something like that. And this was a couple of years ago, and I think the practice is still very much in play. Then you have Sanna Marin, who is the Prime Minister of Finland, who is leading with diversity and inclusion as 2 of her leading values. And then you have Jacinda Ardern, who I consider to be the most effective leader on the planet, leading with empathy. These are 2 examples of what can happen at the highest level of leadership when you take a more pro-human approach to governance. And then you have these attempts at a 4-day work week. This has now even been talked about for Ontario and Canada, actually. What would a 4-day work week look like? But be very skeptical when you hear about these things, because is it a true 4-day work week, or is it a 4-day compressed work week within which you're expected to do 5 days worth of work? And then, you have the United Arab Emirates, who created a ministry of happiness that is dedicated to gauging how happy its population is. How this experiment is going to play out, I don't know. The UAE is a bit of a conundrum, but I think it's the right idea. And then finally, you're seeing these discussions about what would universal basic income do for motivation and overall happiness, and again, the social determinants of health. So all of these are glimpses of a better system, one that doesn't cause us to burn out, but rather to burn bright. And so in the spirit of speaking together, I will end my presentation now and ask you all, what would it take for us as not just members of the Trent University community, not just as Ontarians, as Canadians, but of truly global citizens, to burn bright and not out? What would it take? And before we jump into that, I would like to thank Dr. Buttle, Dr. Mulethaler, Regan, and all of the other principals at Trent University. Thank you all for attending this session today. I know it was a lot of information compressed into a very short amount of time, but like I said, this is the edges of my thoughts. I'm taking you inside my formulation and conception of these ideas as they're happening in real time. My name is Hamza Khan, and this has been an absolute honor. Let's talk.
Hamza, thank you so much. That you gave us a lot to think about. And actually, sometimes I think when you go fast, you keep us alert and awake. So that was great content and great content for us to think about and chat about.
Thank you.
I think what I'll do is, if you don't mind taking off the screen
Sure.
share so we can see more people. And if you want to come on screen, you can, no pressure, but if people want to, it's nicer to see the humans. And if you have a question, I think what we'll do is I will watch for hands up. You can either put your physical real hand up or you can put your computer hand up, and I will watch for that. And Regan will be watching the chat. So if I miss the chat, Regan, you can interrupt me and just say, someone's asking a question in the chat. One thing I wanted to ask before anybody else jumps in, kind of get to do that because I'm the host, so I get to do that. One of the things I've noticed with younger people, this is the positive part, everyone. I'm going to take all that and I'm going to go somewhere positive really briefly. I think people, I'm going to say under 25, but maybe you'd have a different age that you would hit, are less willing to do the schedule of that treadmill, and that I'm hopeful that they're making more flexible choices. And I think maybe you alluded to the fact that the Great Resignation, but also the pandemic having an impact on how people choose to spend their time. Do you think that our students are more aware maybe than their elders, and that they may make different choices?
I think so. I think that they're much more resourceful and able to navigate technology landscape a lot faster, with more dexterity and agility than we do. And I think that we have been trending in this direction of hybrid work, of a more laissez-faire approach to leadership for a long time. So this is not new by any means. We are now experiencing the echoes of the post-World War II factory boom, within which the Theory X style of management, and that is the style of management that assumes that employees are lazy, disinterested, that they don't like work, that they're unmotivated, and so therefore you need to clamp down on them, create these rigid structures. Like the 9-to-5 work week really originated from that post-World War II factory boom, where there was an expectation that you had to be there at a certain time and produce X number of widgets and improve your efficiency over time. But what has been happening with the growth and popularity and proliferation of tools like technologies, rather, that would be a more accurate classification, automation, robotics, machine learning, AI, this effectively should free up more time. This should help us to do less with our day and have more time to focus on other things, how to make the world a better place, how to take care of our elderly, how to advance social justice causes, how to look after ourselves. And I think that what this younger generation is feeling, and I don't want to speak out of turn, because if you identify with this younger generation, you should be the one speaking up and sharing your thoughts. But what I'm experiencing with my students in my very early research is this almost disregard for the old system. I think that they're looking at the vanguards and the people like myself who are part of the older establishment as relics of a time gone by. And I suppose that's true for every generation, right? Every generation looks at the older generation and says, hey, you messed up the world for us. But now there's some very tangible evidence that we have, in fact, created a great imbalance. And we're seeing this happen with skill shortages that's taking place, the Great Resignation. There's so many things that I can point to over here. But all of this is to say, I do have tremendous faith in the young generations, in Gen Z and beyond, who are much more dialed in, are much more connected to each other, much more empathetic, I think, because they have had access to other stories, not just within their own community, but certainly facilitated through social media of people all over the world.
Yeah, thanks for that.
I do think, yeah.
And I think, though, I mean, you said it in your talk, and I acknowledge that you're also suggesting that there are some systemic things here. So one student saying, I think I will, a person taking the individual responsibility to say, I would like a flexible work week and I would like to change my life. If there are systemic, if there are structures in place that don't make that possible, that's part of the problem. So I acknowledge that you did mention that. Kemi, do you want to jump in?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much for that talk, Hamza. That was amazing.
My pleasure, Cami. Thank you.
I don't even know where to begin. Like I want, I now want to go to grad school and study this. Um, yeah, everything you said is on point. And I, not too many people know this, but I actually just recently took a leave from
Good for
work
you.
because I could see myself heading towards burnout, and I was like, nope, this isn't happening. I don't need to do this. Um, how do we get this message out there? How do we talk to employers and get them to realize that this is, as you said, not a failing of an individual person, but like a systematic failing? And how do we change the culture?
I'm really glad you asked, Kemi. And this is the frustrating thing about the time and space that I occupy as a thinker, as researcher, speaker, author, all of that. I do public speaking. I would say that accounts for most of my income, and I'm very grateful to go into these organizations and speak about burnout. But I feel sometimes constrained, especially when I go into organizations and I can't address the root problem. I mean, there's a part of me that just wants to go rogue one day in one of these talks and be like, hey, the people who hired me are the problem, right? And I want to go beyond that and be like, it's the funding sources of this organization. You are engaged. Like this company shouldn't exist. I can't believe I'm speaking to this company. You should just disband. You're bad for the world. And I'm like, I can't do that, right? It's this weird conundrum. This almost sometimes I feel like it's a hypocrisy of my life. And so this is why I'm re-engaging or accelerating my academic research, because I think I need to add a stamp to this line of thought that will that'll go beyond, this person that's just writing books and speaking to organizations. I think that if there were some academic weight behind this, then I think we could form a better foundation upon which we could start to have more concrete conversations. So that's one thing I will say. Like, Kemi, I would very much love it if we could get involved, and if you have an interest in pursuing organizational behavior or communication and culture, whatever the case may be, we can approach this from so many different ways. That would be a great way to start that. How do we get the word out? I think we have to keep this conversation alive. We have to keep on talking about it. We have to help our friends and our families when they're experiencing burnout and they can't identify what the sources of it are. We need to enlighten them. We need to tell them that, hey, you know what? It doesn't matter how much sleep you get. It doesn't matter how much you meditate or how many therapy dogs you play with. You have a toxic boss. Like, this boss is going to quite literally kill you if you continue to work over here. And this is what the Great Resignation is. It's this awareness that has been made possible, at least in Canada, because we've had the flexibility for people who are experiencing precarious labor to go unserved for a couple of months and be like, wow, I was really stressed. Oh my goodness, I used to work for Amazon and I can't believe that I used to defecate and urinate in bags because I couldn't meet my quotas. That's no way to treat a human being, but it's so widespread, unfortunately, that I feel like, I get really upset and passionate when I just think about how much Amazon, and specifically Jeff Bezos, has profited during the pandemic. And then to have the audacity and the lack of the optical awareness to then go into space and say, goodbye, plebes. Like, that to me is just, if I had to point to a super villain, a Bond villain, be like, that's it. That's the toxic triangle. That's the dark triad leader. Look, that's the boogeyman. But I can't do that, because if I do that, then I suddenly lose the audience, because then I just become this ranting and raving person. I don't sound like a sound speaker, author, or an educator. So I have to temper my enthusiasm, keep myself a little grounded, and be patient with this.
You did just say it though, Hamza. Just gonna say that you just did it.
I just said it. Maybe we can cut this part out. We can cut this part out of the talk. And
we'll do some editing.
Amazon is never going to hire me to speak, but if they do hire me to speak, I think I'm going to go rogue in that keynote.
Very good.
Mind if I ask a second question? Sorry.
Sure.
Yeah,
I'll keep my answer shorter. Sorry. Yeah.
I've got two in the chat, but go, Kemi.
Okay, so in your research, thank you. In your research, have you noticed if there's specific demographics of folks for which burnout tends to be higher? So women, POCs, queer people, etc.
Yeah, your hunch would be correct. It is much more common amongst women, POCs, Indigenous, LGBTQIA plus communities. If you went into the pandemic experiencing oppression and disenfranchisement, it didn't get any better for you. It actually got worse. And then, interestingly enough, there also exists a higher levels of burnout, higher intensities of burnout in certain occupations. Any guesses as to what occupation is most likely to produce occupational burnout? Anyone want to take a crack at it?
Dentistry.
Dentistry, yes, Stephanie, dentistry, and pilots for some reason. And I don't know why. Dentistry and pilots. I haven't bothered to explore that further, but if I had to guess, it's probably the lack of structure and the reactive nature of the work. And oh, Christine, absolutely, I forgot to say there's, burnout is instances of burnout are more common and more intense with women to the extent that Herbert Freudenberger and Gail North, the two doctors who pioneered the term burnout, actually had to write a follow-up book to their burnout book called Women's Burnout. And I don't think that enough research has been done to follow up on that thread, because something like motherhood, for instance, is it activates so many of the Holmes and Ross stress index transitional stressors. I can only imagine.
Yeah. I'm just going to read Kasande's question, and Jonathan asked a good one too, but I think they're kind of related in a way. I'm going to go back in the chat here. Can burnout be rooted in unconscious beliefs of what a good worker should be? And actually, I don't even think they're unconscious beliefs. I think they're how we talk about, and you said it in your talk, Hamza, productivity and sort of how we recognize what is good or valuable in society. So, I mean, I think I know what you would say to that, but I'm still going to ask you. So.
And I'll add this very quickly, right? So, I left an organization quite recently, and they hired my replacement within 2 weeks. So that just goes to show, like, you can love a company, your company can call you their family, right? But this it doesn't have the same dynamics as a family. It's a company at the end of the day. It's impersonal. Like I said, I fell in love with capitalism, but capitalism didn't love me back. It's impartial. It doesn't care about me. It doesn't even see me as a human being. It's a system that is invested in just perpetuating itself and growing. So I think it's really important that we come back to the word enough. And that's why I haven't given up speaking about burnout, because I still think there's a powerful precursor of an idea that brings us to where we are today. I don't think that the talk that I delivered today, I would not be hired by any company to deliver this talk. It is a terrible talk to motivate employees and to get people to make change, which is why I bring it up with an academic community, which is why I bring it up with people that are open to this idea. So the idea about being enough and finding out what enough means to you as a human being, with your family, with your loved ones, as somebody outside of the constraints of neoliberalism and the free market, I think that's still a worthwhile exploration.
Yes, thank you. Sorry, I was trying to get my mute off there. Yes, and we're going down a nice gender rabbit hole in the chat, which is excellent. I like to see
fantastic
that as a historian of gender and business, actually.
Absolutely.
So that's, yeah, I think that's true. The other thing I wanted to ask you, and I'm just scanning for hands here, but the other thing I was thinking about as you were talking is a little bit about, sometimes we see the Gwyneth Paltrow sort of, I've become my own self-made marketing genius, so I can set my own hours and everything is awesome.
Yeah.
Now, I know that folks that run their own companies, and you're probably no exception to this, are not less busy, but sometimes there's a little bit of a myth making there too. That's like, well, I've created this lovely structure where I can be flexible outside of the 9-to-5er. And I'm not sure that that's always an easier road, particularly if people are working from home. So what would you say to that sort of, no, I've left the traditional workforce to be my own creative boss? That's not always gonna get you out of this systemic problem, right?
No, and I think it's very much a symptom of the old system in which people felt constrained by their work environment. I remember one of the first jobs that I had, they had a town hall where somebody was recognized for 50 years of service, and I thought to myself, wow, this person has worked here for 50 years. That's incredible, right? That doesn't happen anymore. Like we're very transient as workers in this day and age. We leave jobs on average between 3 and 4 years. So I think what's starting to happen now is, like, that was one extreme where people felt like they had to work for a company and put up with all of its inequities and put up with the toxic triangle and the dark triad leadership. And then what I think is happening now with this push for entrepreneurship and freelance work is very much a reaction to an emergence from that paradigm. And I think it's temporary in terms of how we lionize it and how we prop this up as a dominant myth right now. It's like, wow, this is the exit. Everybody needs to be their own boss, have a side hustle. But then when you actually do it, you realize how overwhelming and exhausting it is. And that, in the case of Gwyneth Paltrow, just how much privilege went into that. Gwyneth Paltrow was allowed to fail so many times, or at least start laps and having run laps around everybody else. So you have to be very skeptical about these myths and understand that we need to do a better job as the culture industry needs to do a better job of telling a more diverse spectrum of stories and normalize and actually celebrate people who don't take that route, who are fantastic contributors within a structure. Entrepreneurship isn't the be all end all. It's not the answer to everything. It is one possible answer for you, but we should also be celebrating people who choose to work at an organization for 50 years. We should also be telling diverse stories of people who are not entrepreneurs, but who might have leveled up within an organization or who are working in, jobs that don't have, movies or Forbes articles written about them. So this is a holistic problem that we need to address.
Yes, thank you for that. Christine, sorry, I actually could not see your hand. But
I know it's a strange background. In my office, which I live in. My background's in philosophy. So as you're talking, I'm thinking about free will. I'm thinking about how we choose what we want and how we internalize the desire for success and the definitions of success. So I think what is one of the challenges that I see is it's not just about giving up someone else's definition of success. It's about undermining our own definitions of success. Like it becomes what you want. You want to be successful. You want to get ahead. And so it's just all those questions around, is that a choice? Have I decided for myself what I want for my life, or what is a good life? And I think what you're pointing at is some of the things we've experienced in the pandemic have called into question for many of us, whether the things I thought I wanted and were really my desires are really mine.
Beautifully said, Christine. I don't know how to respond to that, because that's where I get tangled up as well, right? When I explore burnout and leadership and productivity and the future of work, I come back to this idea that the bottom has fallen out a long time ago and we're just all in free fall right now. There's no certainty. There's no one person. There's no single vision for what the world could be, what success should be. And once upon a time, I suppose we did have that en masse with religion. Right. I remember growing up in a religious tradition, and there was something quite liberating about that at the time, where it's like there was an answer for what happens after all of this. It was really easy to understand that, my time here on earth doesn't just end over here, that if I live my life in a way that is conducive to being a good human being, or, with the tenets of that faith, then maybe I can have something in the afterlife. But once you take away those ideas and you just engage with society in a secular way, it's very easy to become nihilistic. It's very easy to become pessimistic even, and just be like, yeah, we're floating on this pale blue dot in the cold, vast emptiness of space. What's the point of all of this? And then when you layer on top of that people are dying for a paycheck, then you become cynical, and it's like, what the hell? Like, why am I doing this? I should just exit the system. Like today I read an article that talked about time millionaires, which again was in the Globe and Mail. And like I've got a bone to pick with the Globe and Mail. They were saying that people who were exiting their jobs and were deciding in the middle of the workday to go get a scoop of ice cream and work out, that they were time millionaires. And I thought to myself, wow, what a strange reconceptualization of people who are making a decision that is so radical, and like they've been forced to make this decision. We shouldn't about them and speak about them as time millionaires. These are people who are crying out for help. These are people who are, to your point, Christine, trying to re-engage with a transcendent purpose.
And they can't afford ice cream.
And they can't afford ice cream. Exactly.
Let's be realistic.
Especially if this Saturday the pandemic subsidy expires, like people are literally going to die. And my father is one of those people. So this is why I get really frustrated with what this structure is, and who is deciding, who's making decisions for us without us. About us without us.
Can I ask one more follow-up, Mel? I know we're over time.
And then I'm going to read Janine's, and then we're going to close it out. But yes, go ahead.
It's probably not something that you have an answer for, because it's not straightforward. But I remember my faculty members, when I was talking about, wanting to make change, they always said, you make change by going into the organization and changing it from within. Because if you just bang on the door from outside, yelling and screaming, nothing happens. So how do we, it seems like the burnout kicks you out. And so how do we make the change from inside without falling down the rabbit hole?
And Christina, I think you've asked a fantastic question. I will make my answer very succinct over here. I too have subscribed to the idea that to change a system, you have to be a part of the system. And I think that my career decisions have been largely influenced by that philosophy of going deep within the system and changing it from the inside. But then in the last 5 years, we've seen a couple of really powerful examples of change from without. Me Too and Time's Up, Black Lives Matter, the Women's March are 3 examples of change that has been galvanized by the populace at large from without, that has then forced the structure to change, and in some cases have actually collapsed the structure. Like, I'm looking at Me Too specifically. So there's a part of me that's just like, wow, maybe, just maybe I don't have to do this from the inside. Maybe there's a hybrid approach. Maybe I can have one foot in academia, speaking, teaching, writing, but maybe I need to activate the other part of me that is the activist. Maybe I need to get more involved in protests, in marches, and in fundraising, and in community organization to change the structure using like a pincer movement almost, from the inside and from the outside.
Yeah. Yeah, and I'm reading what you're saying there, Kat, about change within and without, and I don't want to ignore Kasonde's point about women's burnout, and I think we'll have to save that one for when Hamza is here, more around gender and burnout, although there's a lot we could say about that. But just to close off with Janine's point about working half-time at Trend, so working in a job in that scenario, and also working as a small business owner and an entrepreneur, and that world is also now pressuring. And Etsy, I know what you mean, Janine. It started as a very you can holistically do something organic and beautiful from your home, and maybe you can sell your wares, and it's this creative outlet, right? But it turns it into a very competitive capitalist marketplace, is I think what you're saying in part there.
And they've totally, it becomes more and more commercialized, where what they promote is the more like huge brands, and the little people who used to just, and then this whole and if you're 2 shops talking to each other, like, you have to talk to each other every day for the next 500 years, or you will downgrade your ratings. And it's just like that pressure of, you always have to be on, you always have to be Instagramming, you have to do all this other stuff. It's like, when am I going to do my bookkeeping?
Yeah. Can I quickly respond to that, Janine? I think that's a really important point. I was just talking about it last night with my partner, who does some really interesting research on psychological safety in social media. And I used I made the comment that, it feels like sometimes we are employees of these social networks. Because like Instagram, for instance, whenever they change their algorithm, Janine, I didn't know that was the case with Etsy, that you had to talk to other shops. For instance, on Instagram, the most recent update, in order for you to get the most engagement on your post, you have to be posting stories every single day. Now, we're not paying for Instagram with our money. I don't think that Instagram has you pay $9 a month for Instagram. So what are we paying with then? Like, how are we getting this service? How are we getting these servers and all the space online? It's because we are the product. That they're commodifying us, our likes, our engagement, our indications for what brands are hot and what brands are not. So that was a huge problem for me, where like sometimes the structure is invisible, but it's also in plain sight.
Yeah. So I think what I don't want to be too positive here. I recognize the problems. I'm not trying to be Pollyanna about this, but I think the positive part is, we're talking about these things and thinking about them in creative ways. And Hamza is clearly doing that. And I think all of us are thinking about our own lives in interesting ways. And I think we've seen that in the last few years with a lot more people talking about those issues. It doesn't mean that every organization is changing, but it's interesting to see. And it's interesting to see how the pandemic pushed the envelope a little bit on people thinking about their work lives. I think the other positive thing is that recognition that it's not all on you, people. It's not your job to be like, oh, why can't I meditate more? As Hamza said, why can't I be more organized? Not everything comes down to you being more organized. There are some larger systemic things. So give yourself a little break there. It's not all yours to carry, right?
Absolutely.
Hamza, thank you so much for a really great conversation. We all got a lot, I'm going to say, I think we all got a lot out of that, and we really appreciated it. We can't wait to have you here with us in person in January and to learn a little bit more. We have two more Enwayaang talks coming up in November. We'll send you all the links so that you can all see them and join us again. And thanks for all the comments. I really should try to copy them for you for your research, Hamza, if I can. I don't know how to do that.
Thank you, Dr. Buttle. This was fantastic. Thank you to everybody who participated, who watched today. You know, I know that this was a hard talk to digest, and again, it was unfinished, it was raw. But my commitment to you and certainly everybody else is that over the course of my fellowship, I really want to apply myself at this set of problems some more. And so I'm looking forward to meeting you in person, meeting you online. You know, integrating myself into the Trent community, sitting in on classes side by side with you, and broadening my understanding of these problems so that hopefully together we can work on some solutions. So thank you so much. This is a tremendous privilege.
Wonderful. Thanks so much, Hamza. Thanks, everyone. A little clap if you're there and you want to. There we go.
Take care, everyone. We'll stay in touch. I'll see you soon. Bye.